What's up, everyone? Welcome back to a drawing with Nihongo Gamer video. I'm pretty sure I'm going to change the title, the name of this channel, eventually. Anyway, the main topic that I want to talk about while doing some practice drawing today is, does your environment affect the way you draw and affect the kinds of things that you draw? And mainly I'm talking about an environment like being in Japan and being able to draw manga or anime. So I think this is also one of those topics which is huge and probably needs to be a series of its own. But I'm going to try my best to talk about as much of it as I can in the 15 minutes or so that I've got for these 10 Pose Maniacs drawings. Now, there are a large number of videos, especially there's a large number of channels in Japan that really like this particular website, Pose Maniacs, which is why I keep using it. And a lot of people say, like, if you do 30 days of drawing in Pose Maniacs every single day, then you're going to make a marked improvement in your drawing. So that's why I'm doing these drawings, but I haven't actually nailed down the technique that I'm using. At the moment, I'm just using boxes and, spheres and, cylinders for things like the arms, or just sticks for the arms if I don't have time. Essentially just trying to get into the habit of drawing every day and figuring out what it is that I'm having trouble with, so that at least once I've done a few of these drawings, a week or so of these drawings, I'll know what to look up in terms of videos and resources and books, so I can figure out what it is I need to work on before I go back into trying to do daily practice. So anyway, while I'm drawing these stick figures, and sometimes they're ballet poses, and sometimes they're sports poses, and sometimes you can't see the person at all. It's like you would never take a photo at that angle, but the ability to draw at that angle is important if you want to be able to draw things like the background characters, or even a foreground character. There are situations where a character is not going to be just standing up straight facing the camera. So they're just stick figures, let's say stick figures, they're just mannequin characters for today. But the topic is actually more about your ability to draw anime. And the reason I want to talk about it is because I've been thinking about it for such a long time. And I don't want to just talk about random topics on this channel that are, about life or video games, or, actually maybe I'll talk about video games eventually. But I really want to, as much as possible, stick with drawing topics. And if you don't know what my history is, I actually was born in the UK and grew up pretty much my whole life in the UK. I actually spent maybe, a third of my life or so in America. And then the first third of my life in England, the second third of my life in America. And then, a large portion of my life here in Japan, which is where I am now. And definitely an interest in anime and Power Rangers, Pokemon, video games, all sorts of stuff drew me to want to at least visit Japan, once. But something I've always noticed when going to conventions like the MCM London Expo in England, or I've seen, art that's drawn by people in America that is quite obviously anime inspired. It's hard to say whether anime is a style or not. But I've always felt like people who don't live in Japan or grow up surrounded by anime, their art is often very noticeably foreign. And maybe this is less obvious these days because a large number of kids grew up thinking that Naruto is just a TV show that you watch on, American or British TV. But when I was growing up watching TV, the main TV shows we had were, things like Centurions. Actually, when I watched Centurions, it was a rerun of the original run of Centurions. But, things like Centurions, G.I. Joe, Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, or Ninja Turtles, depending on the country you were in. And I was not naturally exposed to a whole lot of anime, except for the anime that I didn't know came from Japan. So one of them, I don't actually know if it was just the intro or if it was the series as well. I discovered later that Thundercats, if you haven't heard of it, it's this classic American TV TV cartoon where a bunch of people leave from a planet called Thundara, and they crash land on. Wait, I think they crash land on Earth or some other planet, and the boy, unlike everyone else in the plane that crashed, he actually grew up and became a man, and everyone else stayed the same age. And he's dealing with the fact that now he's probably the strongest of them all, and he's like 20 years older or something. Anyway, it sounds kind of boring the way I'm explaining it, but he has this cool sword, and it gets longer when he needs to use it to fight enemies, which is great. You want a sword that's portable, but can get long and hit people far away when necessary, right? Well, I didn't know that some portion of that was actually drawn in Japan. So it means that to some extent, I was exposed to Japanese products, Japanese TV shows like Power Rangers and Robotech. A lot of these things like Robotech and Sailor Moon, I knew at that time that they were Japanese because that was the point of Toonami. They were like importing as much Japanese animation as possible. But there were shows, the first time I saw them, I didn't know they were Japanese. I think Speed Racer might have been one of the very first shows that I watched. And at the time, because it was dubbed in English, I had no idea that that was originally a Japanese show. It wasn't until I was an adult that I even knew that it had a different title. It's not called Speed Racer in Japan. Anyway, I am getting kind of getting carried away just talking about the history of anime that I watched as a kid. But the main point I'm trying to make is that depending on your exposure to Japanese animation or Japanese manga or just illustration styles for, mobile games or card games or toys or anything that's in Japan. For a long time when I was growing up, it was very obvious when someone was faking it, like trying to make an anime-looking character. Or the most infamous one is if you search on Google, there was this terrible, terrible how to draw anime book. And it didn't look anything like anime. It was horrific. It didn't look like anime. It didn't look like Western style. It was like a horror. It was like a horror show. It's just like, it was like a Dali painting. The eyes were literally melting off the character's face. It was horrendous. And everyone knew that. And it was all the funnier for it. And, it's become a meme these days. But you go to things like MCM Comic Con, and there's a huge number of people who grew up in the UK and grew up in America, just like me, who loved Japanese styles and wanted to draw in that style. But because we're not surrounded by it, we can only go off by the few shows that we have actually been exposed to. And so I think one of the things that I read online from a Japanese person was they had looked at some fan art, some illustration work, some character design by a foreigner, and they were like, why is it when foreigners draw Japanese, inspired illustrations, and they say like they love Japan and they draw Japanese stuff, why does it always look like it came from the 80s or the 70s or the 80s? And this is the thing. When you learn a style, when you develop a style, you're usually following your favorite anime, right? Or your favorite TV show, or whatever it is. You're inspired by something, and you mimic something at the start. And when it comes to anime, let's say that you want to create your own original anime style, and honestly, that's what most people are doing, right? In Japan, they're all doing their best to create their own original, it's quite obviously anime illustration. It's not a realistic illustration, but that is such a large topic because there are animations and animation movies and animes that are very, very realistic, and manga that's super, super realistic. One of my favorite ones is Solanin by, what's his name, Asano Inoue. Absolutely awesome manga, which I bought for the very first time in England. Discovered that before I came to Japan. But the point is, no matter what country you're in, whether it's UK, America, or Japan, everyone's trying to create their own, most people are trying to create their own original styles, and they can only create an amalgamation of the styles that they're surrounded by. And if you grew up in America or the UK, all you can really combine together are the few shows that you've seen. And that tends to be Speed Racer, Bubblegum Crisis, a little bit of Gunsmith Cats, whatever Viz Media picked up at the time, or Tokyo Pop, whatever the brands were at that time. And as a result, it's not that the inspiration was fake. It's genuine anime and manga from Japan that people were reading and being inspired by. But there's so many fewer sources. It's just like I was inspired by Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball and Macross, right? I mean, personally, I don't draw in any of those styles. But let's say that those were the three shows that you watched the most, because those were the only real three only shows that you could watch on Toonami. Now you're talking about basing your new art career, your style, on three shows, when the people who grew up in Japan, kids who are Japanese or even foreigners who are born in Japan, they're surrounded by Japanese styles from the day they're born. It's printed on their diapers, it's printed on their cereal, it's on their lunch boxes, it's on their texts, it's in their textbooks. They hire, legit animation professionals to draw characters because they know that these are characters that the kids are going to respond to and like. So they use, legitimate illustrators from the industry, even in things like their textbooks. Anyway, the point is, it's not just people who like anime and manga, comics, just reading it for fun. It's surrounding you everywhere in Japan. It's on sushi restaurant posters. It's in the advertising. It's in the posters that you see just walking around town. It's in restaurant menus. It's in cinemas. It's in movies. There's just no way to escape Japanese styles and illustration. And not all of them are the styles that we're used to in the West, I don't think that a lot of people really immediately accepted One Piece as like a traditional anime style, because the characters in One Piece, Oda's style, they've got really round faces, and actually they're very cartoony, like Asterisk. Is it called Asterisk? No, it's Asterix. The French, I think it's a French cartoon, and it's called Asterix. They've got very round faces and very cartoony, stretchy limbs like you would find in, I don't know, a Looney Tunes animation. So I think our concept of what constitutes an anime style in the West, we weren't able to define it and with as wide a scope as it deserves, because we weren't surrounded by a large number of shows. So to us, having a triangular shaped head is kind of an important hallmark of an anime style. But in Japan, of course, a majority of anime styles do have triangular heads in, the main anime styles that go on TV. But manga, it's anything and everything in between. They got circular heads, especially the early stuff before the really modern stuff that was popularized in the 90s and the early 2000s in the West. What I'm trying to say is, if you grew up in Japan, you probably have a very different concept of what constitutes an, again, quote, I quote, anime style. And in the West, when someone says, I would describe my style as kind of anime inspired, it's got a wider definition than what it used to be. I think in the old days it was the main ones, people knew the main shows were Bubblegum Crisis, Tenchi Muyo, Sailor Moon, and Dragon Ball. But it didn't really go much further than that. I think these days, if you say I'm inspired by an anime style, it's probably much more open to interpretation. Like I said at the start, it's kind of impossible to completely discuss these topics in only 15 minutes. And the reason I know it's exactly 15 minutes is because these are 90-second poses. They're on Pose Maniacs, and I just chose the 90-second setting, and there's 10 of them, which is perfect because if I'm drawing in the morning or even if I'm drawing in the evening, 15 minutes just feels like a really good amount of time to get get some drawing done in the day, do a little bit of practice, but then still have time to do all the important stuff that I need to do, like get ready for just a normal day of work. So that was today's topic, just talking about how your style changes depending on where you grew up. And even if you think you have an anime style, perhaps you have more of a Sailor Moon style. It's not really an anime style. It's like you have a Dragon Ball Sailor Moon Macross style. Or if you lived in Japan and said, oh, I just have an anime style, it's like people would immediately know that that's a much wider defined style than just the narrow idea that we had of it in the West, in the early days. But it's definitely changed. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm going to do as many of these talk videos as I can, so it's not just pencil sound and me practicing, but I don't know how many topics I can talk about before I run out of art topics, because again, I haven't been drawing every day for a very long time, and I don't know really how much else I can talk about. Or suggest topics that you'd like to hear in the future in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next one.